spiritually and also with regard to their religious observance as well. Not observance, but you know, being members of a faith tradition or not. So I'm excited to hear another perspective on that and the whole question of vocations. It'll help me certainly be better informed about dealing with young adults, especially in the formation work that I do.
Wonderful.
Hi, this is Marianne. I echo the remarks of my colleague Greg, and also part of what I do for the District of East North America is to work with young adults, LaSallian youth, and young LaSallian professionals, in addition to working with our campus ministers, religion teachers, and our LaSallian animators. And so part of it, again, is to, for myself personally, to have this opportunity to learn more, to be able to better accompany those folks, but also to be able to hear about particularly the up-and-coming events around the Synod and World Youth Day. I'm very interested in those as well. So thank you.
Well, one of the things that we're probably very conscious of is your reality, and some of you have already mentioned that, especially in your introduction. But I ask that as you enter this, this is going to be a little bit, for those who were at the last webinar or other webinars, a lot of this is going to be a lot of more personal, asking you personally how you engage this topic. So I think it's one of those things to be conscious of. We can't think of ministry with young people apart from thinking about ourselves as ministers. And so just being very aware of your reality, your circumstances, your challenges, both professionally, circumstantially, geographically, and even personally. What are the things that you wrestle with and the things that you're joyful in this? So I just, in the course of this, I asked to do that. And the reason is because I want to share a little bit, real briefly, on why I'm here, why I am speaking of this. And really, my part of this really comes down to these four individuals: Deborah, Brendan, Allison, and Nick. A lot of what I do related to young adults goes back to these individuals: Deborah and Brendan and Allison and Nick, all young people that I've had the joy of working with over the years in ministry. And for me personally, their story, their journey has been part of what has fueled my own work with young people. So I say this at the beginning just so that we get into these webinars, we get into these presentations and topics in church work, and we can get right ahead, and we're very much Marthas. We're ready to get to work. Tell me what I need to do. And so I ask that you bring that Mary part of your work with you as well. And just keep in mind the young people that you do work with. Think of their faces, think of their stories, their journeys that you've walked with, and then pray for people that you've yet to walk with in the future. And allow that to keep grounding you as to why you are doing this work. And I think that that's a good place for us to start in this setting. But if you are a little bit of Martha and you like to know literally where we're going in this webinar, here are four things we're going to really unpack here. First, we're going to talk about the church's current focus on young people and discernment, and kind of share a little bit about that. So you were just asking about kind of some of the new things that are coming, up and coming things that are coming. We'll talk about that briefly, because a lot of that informs where we're going to be going for the rest of this. Another thing is understanding our reality. So you were also asking about kind of what is the state of young people, what is the state of vocations today, and we'll kind of, if you like charts and graphs, I've got a few of those. If you don't like charts and graphs, I don't have that many. I know that previous webinars have had a lot. I have a few, but enough for those of you who like it to get your share. And then we're going to talk about creating a culture of vocation, because that is really the thrust of what we're talking about, especially with the Synod, and what does that mean, especially in our work. And then number 4, we're going to get into the practical, and that's probably where I'm going to spend most of the time in our time, is number 4 there, of the different ways of accompaniment. This is the practical, this is the best practices of effective vocations ministry And because I'm speaking to you within the Lasallian tradition, also to think of that, how do these ways of accompaniment intersect with the charism of your community, the traditions, and your own best practices? And that's an area where I may also hand it over to you to see how does, is there anything in particular that is unique to the Lasallian experience that takes in all of this? So something to think about as we go forward. So let's dive in. First, the church's focus. The wonderful thing right now is that the church is very much focused internationally and nationally on young people. We've got an upcoming convocation this summer, a convocation of Catholic leaders with a very strong interest in the emerging leaders that are coming up, and many of them are young adults. So that's been a part of it. The Synod, we're going to speak about that. That's a whole webinar in and of itself, is the Synod. The Encuentro, some of you may have heard about this, but this is the church's engagement with the Hispanic Latino culture. In particular, they're really focusing in on young people and Hispanic Latino young people in the United States. Something that may not be known as much about, but you will be hearing about soon, is at the Bishops' Conference we'll be having some what we're calling youth to young adult resources. One of the upcoming statements from the bishops will be focused on the transition from youth to young adulthood, and then the transitions that take place within youth and young adulthood, which is where we find some of the disconnect churches when those transitions are not handled well. So we're going to have some resources coming out in the next year on that. World Youth Day is certainly a focus that comes around every several years, and this time is no different. And then we're also involved in a national dialogue, and a previous presenter that you had, Charlotte, her and I are both working on this national dialogue with basically bringing some unity to the field of youth and young adult ministries, as well as finding ways to implement what does come out of the Synod, hopefully with a unified voice in this country. So there's a lot of things that are bubbling up, and I probably haven't even scratched the surface of the local things that are happening. So there is a lot of focus on this. Even the next couple of years, each year the Holy Father has a theme related to World Youth Day. And in the next 3 years, the themes of World Youth Day are all leading up to the large one in Panama in 2019. And what's neat about this next 3-year cycle is that they have a vocations element to it. So the Holy Father has been very keen to point out that the Synod and World Youth Day and the journey to World Youth Day are very much tied together. In fact, over the next 3 years, the themes focus in on a discernment process. The first year, 2017, in this cycle, is focusing in on the past, focusing in on what has happened, how the Lord has worked in our life, and to really discern the past. The second year will be focused on the present and where you can see God around you. And then the third year is focused in on the future, on where we're leading. So the quote that goes with the past is from Mary's prayer in the first chapter of Luke. The Mighty One has done great things for me, and holy is his name. The Synod, as part of this, as I said, is going to be a multi-year process of preparation and consultation. The Holy Father really wants a consultation with all young people across the board. He does not want anyone to be excluded from the process of the Synod, whether that be in the local consultations or the international consultations. We're anticipating in a few weeks that the Vatican will be releasing a website with a survey for all young people to fill out, and with that, that will be a way for the Holy Father to hear from all the world's young people. But in addition, each of the local consultations with bishops and movements and organizations will also hopefully be tapping into what they're all about, culminating in a Synod in 2018, and that ultimately, we're hoping, leads to the publication of an apostolic exhortation in 2019. So the last apostolic exhortation was Amoris Laetitia, and the one before that was Evangelii Gaudium. So as many of you know, those were significant works that have come out from the Holy See, and so we expect the third apostolic exhortation of Pope Francis would be focused on young people, and I think that will become kind of a manifesto of sorts of how we do our ministry with young people. So it's something for any of you who work in that field, that is something to be looking forward to. But in order for us to get to that point, we need a preparation process, which will happen over the next 2 years. In 2018, again, looking at the present moment, the theme, do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. So this year will be focused on how we look around us and how God has blessed us in our lives. It'll also be, again, focused on the Marian theme and drawing young people's attention to the tradition of Marian devotion, which in preparation for Panama is very important because of the strong connection of Mary with Latin America. Speaking of which, the Encuentro process in the United States, as I said, is happening alongside this, and this will be happening from this year to 2019 and beyond. This year it's starting on a parish and diocesan level, next year on a regional and national level, and then beyond that an implementation level. And a lot of the questions that are engaged with the Synod are similar questions to what's being asked specifically of Latino young people in this country. So we see a lot of connections and cooperation between these processes. It really is the spirit at work, because much of the work for the Encuentro has been years in the making, and so it's wonderful that a lot of this ties together with what's happening internationally. And then 2019, the year of the International World Youth Day in Panama, stateside and around the world, is I am the servant of the Lord, may it be done to me according to your word. So again, that future focus of where we're going. So this whole cycle is helpful for us, because this is the moment in the church for young people. So we are actually at a very incredible time. If your ministry connects with youth or young adults in any way, shape, or form, or anyone has that connection, these next couple of years are perhaps some of the most important years that we have, because a lot of conversations that are happening around the world and around this country are really focused on young people. Perhaps not since the dawn of World Youth Day in the 1980s has such a focus been put on youth and young adults. And it probably can't come at a greater time, and we'll get to that in a little bit as to why the urgency of the moment is important for this focus. And what I'd like to do is actually share with you a few principles that we've, as outlined by Pope Francis, and in particular by the U.S. Apostolic Nuncio, Archbishop Pierre. Now I bring him up because he's new to our country. He was just appointed by Pope Francis last year to be the Apostolic Nuncio. And his first address to the bishops of the United States, his inauguration address, if you would, to the bishops was 90% focused on young people. Young people was the focus of his first words to our bishops. And so I've taken some of the phrases that he used in his address to the bishops as helpful for us. And we've seen some of that echoed by Pope Francis and the Synod documents as well. So you'll hear a little bit of that throughout this as well. But a few things just to keep in mind. Oh, and by the way, that is Archbishop Pierre on the right and Pope Francis on the left. So now we know who we're talking about, in case you didn't know who Pope Francis was. So I'll begin with the Holy Father, and again, some principles that he has kind of, and I'm beginning this kind of in a broad sense. We'll get into the specifics as we go forward. But the first thing, listen to the cry arising from your inner selves. That is the Pope's letter to young people, and that is kind of the way he really begins this. Archbishop Pierre reminds us some principles. There's a temptation to think that we only need to teach them, that the only purpose of young people is that they are objects to be taught. And for many people that seems to be their relationship with young people is, they're young, their minds need to be filled, and I'm there to fill it. And so Archbishop Pierre is kind of warning us that that is a temptation, but it's not necessarily true. Pope Francis, again, going back to him, the Church also wishes to listen to your voice, your sensitivities, and your faith even your doubts and your criticism. It's interesting to hear the Holy Father really ask, I want you to tell me, criticize me. I want to hear it. Make your voice heard. Let it resonate in the communities, and let it be heard by your shepherds of souls. So that's a clarion call to us. Again, Archbishop Pierre, and I'm bouncing back and forth because really what they're really speaking about really is, it goes together. Archbishop Pierre, the whole church and each of us and its members must decide to go to and walk with our young people, to each and every one. When a young person experiences the joy of an encounter with Jesus in his heart, he can no longer close himself off to the horizon of vocation, whether as a priest, religious, married, or single person. So there he's really telling us that we have to go out, and that when we can open young people up, when we can help them not close themselves off, then these vocations really start to take root. The upcoming synod and the preparation for it will provide a window for us to learn from young people. Again, that's that notion that our work with young people is not about them as object, and that was something very key for Pope Francis, is they are not objects, but rather for us to learn from them, to listen to them, to be with them, and to help them discover God's plan for them. Our presence will remind them that they matter. And again, that's a key phrase there. Our presence will remind them that they matter. Because one of the things that with young people today we find over and over again is that they feel that they don't matter, that they can't make a difference. And sometimes in the world they feel that way, that they're just one voice amongst billions, and will they really matter? And so for the church to say our presence will remind them of that is very key. In a changing environment, it is we who must be on the move, open to a real conversion, a true metanoia of mind and heart. Again, pointing it back to us that in all of this, some of the key principles is that it is we who must be on the move. I think there's a lot of, when working with young people, one of the temptations we face is that many of them, we think, oh, young people need to move closer to us, but rather they're encouraging us to move towards them and for us to be open to conversion. And hopefully young people can teach us something too. Again, it's revolutionary in how we engage with young people, and I think that's very exciting. And then a message from Pope Francis, a very key principle for this with two young people, is even when the journey is uncertain and you fall, God, rich in his mercy, will extend his hand to pick you up. Again, that notion to keep moving. But I think this message also applies to us, because I think many of us could probably come up with countless examples of times when we ourselves have struggled in the ministry, and maybe we've had programs or events that nobody showed up to, or it kind of was a flop. And I think that we need to remember this message from the Holy Father as well, that God, rich in his mercy, will extend his hand to pick us up too as we journey with young people. So those are just some key principles. So the second part here, where we are, understanding our realities. So first, I just want to speak about young people. The way the Synod preparatory document, which is this one here, the Synod preparatory document outlines, it says, today's generation of young people live in a world which is different from that of their parents and educators. And that's a key thing they reiterate, is that young people today are different. Now, we're not saying that they're better, they're worse, their situations are better, their situations are worse. It's just different. And I think that's a key thing to keep in mind, because oftentimes when we work with young people, heck, myself, I'm only, I'm one generation removed from the young adults that are out there, and it's different from when I was engaged as a young adult. So, and we rapidly change. Even somebody who is 5 years away from their youth or their young adulthood, things change so rapidly, even they may need to realize that the young people today live in a world different from that of us. Young people's aspirations, needs, feelings, and manner of relating to others have changed as well. And I think that's key. The way in which young people relate to others is changing. So we can't just lean back, and I think that's a key principle when dealing with young people. And this is something that you may have heard in previous webinars, but just to lay as a basis here, we're talking about a number of the young people we're talking about are probably those in the millennial generation, Generation Z. That's kind of the object of the synod. Pope Francis very clearly outlined in the synod document who he meant by young people, and that was those 16 to 29. It's a particular target group. Now, it's not to say that those younger than 16 or older than 29 aren't part of our work and our ministries, but as far as the synod document and even World Youth Day, that's really the target range there. So we're talking about Generation Y, Generation Z, just so that you're aware of who we're talking about here. And one of the things, just a key thing about, and this is part of the charts and graphs for those of you who like these, this is part of that. So some of the influencers of faith on active Catholic youth, again, we're seeing, as the quote said before, their needs, their means of relating to each other and to faith is changing. So perhaps a generation or two or three ago, these may not have been the same things. But in terms of what influences faith of young people, large conferences, this is an event-driven generation, service experiences, very experiential, retreats, speakers. I'm not saying that we live in a celebrity culture and that these people, but the fact that they zone in on certain individuals whom they look up to, that's a key thing. It's interesting that, of this, that just regular attendance at Mass is on the lower end. It's not that it's not high, but it's certainly it's lower than some of the other things. So it makes us consider what is it that we are engaging with our young people. This is another thing in terms of where our young people are at. This here is a chart, one of my more favorite ones, that asks the questions, how often do you attend Mass? It's not favorite because I like the statistic, but it really outlines for us very much what we're working with here. And in particular, Generation Z is not on here yet because this was taken before they really could start answering these questions. But we see the millennials. We see that 17% go to Mass on a weekly basis. What that means is that 83% of millennials are not going to Mass on a weekly basis. Let that sink in for a moment. 83% are not going. It's a reality probably many of us are aware of, but this is the context into which we ask these questions. This is why when Pope Francis says, I want everyone engaged in the synod, whether you are an active Catholic or whether you are indifferent to the church, I want you involved. That makes, first of all, that just makes clear sense if you look at this chart, because if we were just talking about the active Catholics, we would just be hearing from 17% of the millennial generation, when in fact we want to hear from all of them, even the ones who are less active, indifferent. We want to hear from everyone on that column on the far right, not just the top. And that's a key element to this. And in general, the lifestyles of, for Catholics are certainly, we see the trend lines are going down. Marriages are a particularly interesting thing here. You see that marriages are one of the steepest drops. And this is a vocations question. This is, some have said that this kind of information is one of the reasons why Amoris Laetitia led into the Synod on Vocation, because as young people are detaching from faith, marriages are going down as well. So those who are, church marriages are not what they used to be. So it's a very fascinating aspect of things. And then we'll get a little, but then I have a few statistics, and then I'll pause here for any comments or questions or clarifications. But I have a few here, and I'll go through these pretty quickly. But these are vocation statistics. As you know, the USCCB with CARA annually asks their ordination classes what were their influences, and so that we can see trend lines over time. So again, this tells how, in terms of who encouraged the young people to consider priesthood, you see obviously that the parish priests are pretty high. About middle of the range down there is a youth minister or campus minister, school chaplain, religious sister, religious brother. So many of you who are on the call represent some of those areas. You see that, you know, we're in the mid-range in terms of that. That's something to keep in mind. Let's see here. In terms of the profession class, again, we're in the middle range, but one thing that's interesting is that if you look between the ordination and the profession, you'll notice that just in general, the rankings for, if you look at the campus minister, school chaplain, teacher, youth minister, they go slightly up with those in religious life than they do with priesthood. So, but what I also find fascinating is that mothers usually are high influence, but in here, fathers actually have a pretty good influence on this. So there's just some things to keep in mind. The discouragement. The one thing that's nice is that those in ministry with youth and college students, this is where we're doing pretty well. We do not discourage people from considering priesthood as much as, let's just say, the mother or the father, or even clergy, you know, and their parish priests. So, so that's a really good sign that the discouragement is not that high. Same thing with the profession class, although it's a little bit higher than it is for priesthood. And then in terms of the, I'm switching back to the ordination class, what programs or activities were they participating in before they got involved in seminary? And you can see parish youth group is the highest one, which is really good. Catholic Campus Ministry Center ranks up there. Knights of Columbus, the young adult groups are very high. So you see that what this shows is that active involvement in youth ministry, young adult ministry, or the campus ministry seem to have a nice correlation to that. So in terms of encourager and discourager, we can have a discussion about that. But it's interesting the type of programs or activities. World Youth Day also has been, each year this number seems to grow. World Youth Day has a pretty high ranking, or at least a sizable ranking of this. But again, it shows just the more active young people are in the activities of their faith, the more likely they are to be engaged. Again, similar numbers for religious profession. Again, young adult, interesting, young adult ministry ranks really high for religious profession. So that's very fascinating, that engagement when you're in your 20s or 30s is a key component, even more so than the priesthood. So it's, again, a fascinating element in this as well. So before we ask where we're going in creating a culture of vocation, I just want to stop here. I know I threw a lot of statistics your way, but I'm just pausing at this moment for any clarification or questions or even observations that you might have had when seeing that piqued your interest.
Hi, this is Marianne. Thank you for sharing that information. A couple of slides that I hadn't seen before, or at least the information not quite, put into that context. So I think one of the things that continues to remain a challenge is the role of parents, particularly in looking at vocation work. And so for those of us that are engaged in educational ministries, working with young people in our high school and campus ministry and other apostolate programs, then the question is, how do we engage and reach out to the parents, the step-parents, the relatives that are those people of influence in the life of our young people who are considering a vocation to religious life or to the priesthood. So, yeah, thank you.
That's a great observation, and I'll get into that in a moment, so thank you. Any other observations or any other questions or clarifications?
Yeah, this is Stan. One of the things that strikes me about some of the statistical data that you put up there, Paul, was kind of this underlying notion that the environment within which vocations are cultivated has some sort of a connection to the kind of community of faith that surrounds that individual. So persons of faith and a community of faith, and then experiences in which the faith can be lived are all part and parcel of this kind of equation that leads to an optimal environment for vocations to really become fostered. So one of the things that just kind of is kind of going out in my mind here is, how do we attend to that question of creating that kind of a faith dynamic, in my case on a high school campus, so that when we talk about vocation, it's not simply a theological idea for study in a religion class, but it really has something to do with your purpose and meaning in life and the direct call that God has for you as created in his image and likeness. And who are the people that are going to engage young people in that particular kind of a conversation?
Yeah, I think that because there is a certain sense of the times are changing, and we're reminded of that in some of those quotes. We, in a way, if you want to get a little bit simplified here, since we no longer live in Bing Crosby's America, where that's how vocations were formed. In a way, these experiences need to serve in that way, since the community no longer lives around the church, for about, maybe 4 or 5 blocks out, and that's in a square, mile or something like that around the church. That's not the community of today. So creating environments that, I don't want to say replicate it, but serve that same function as those may have done half a century ago. So you're right, we have to create that environment, and what's especially important for younger people today is experiences, which maybe not all that different from previous generations. Experiences have always been important, but just the heightened notion of experience over even knowledge or anything else is key for them. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're going and creating this culture of vocations. And so the question has always come up: what is a vocation? Who has one? So going back to the Synod document, I apologize, there's a lot of words here, but really the Synod preparatory document is helpful in that it lays out a foundation for us of how we're understanding vocation. In the introduction, it says, for every person, the vocation to love, and again, that's a key element, the vocation to love takes a concrete form in everyday life through a series of choices, which find expression in the states of life, marriage, ordained ministry, consecrated life, professions, forms of social and civil commitment, lifestyle, management of time and money, etc. Whether these choices are willfully made or simply accepted, either consciously or unconsciously, no one is excluded from making these choices. So again, Pope Francis is reminding us that this experience is not limited to just active Catholics and how can we get them to be going to have a Catholic wedding or become a priest or religious, but rather it's this broad sense, and that he contextualizes vocation in the vocation to love, which takes a concrete form. It's an interesting definition of vocation. Certainly for those of you in vocation work, many definitions have been offered over the years. So just to find that this is how this vocations is being talked about in this context, in this moment. Also, the purpose of vocational discernment is to find out how to transform one's life choices in the light of faith into steps towards the fullness of joy to which everyone is called. In the document, it's very practical. It's an interesting thing. They've gone very practical and really laid out 3 steps of discernment in the document: recognizing God's call, interpreting God's call, and then ultimately choosing to act on it. That third choice of the choosing, the action step, is of course sometimes the most difficult. but it lays it out there, the process by which a person makes fundamental choices in dialogue with the Lord and listening to the voice of the Spirit. So that's the outline of discernment as offered in the preparatory document. We anticipate that as we go forward with the synod, that this will be fleshed out more. So those of you who are involved in Vocations ministry, I encourage you to dialogue in your local area with your bishop, with those who are working on the synod consultation process, in terms of how they are unpacking the concept of discernment and how it might line up with your own traditions. Again, in the prayer vigil for World Youth Day last month, Pope Francis says, "At your age, you have the future ahead of you. Life holds out a mission to young people today. The church holds out a mission, and I would like to entrust you with this mission." So I put this here because ultimately what I think in terms of what a culture of vocations is about is really developing future-focused ministry. And I bring this up simply because in my experience in ministry, we often are focused on the now, or we're either on the past, trying to figure out what we did or didn't do right, or we're focused on specifically the task ahead of us. Too many ministry leaders are, their primary focus is the next major event, the thing that's happening right now. But how often are our ministry leaders looking to the future of their young people? And so I think one of the key components to creating a culture of vocation is really just orienting ourselves more towards the future. So what can we do? Some ways of accompaniment, some practical things. I would say one of the things that every ministry should consider doing is creating an exit strategy while you and the young people are in the middle of it all. Again, that gets to this notion that we're too caught up in the moment. I get a lot of these questions when I talk about this. I get, well, I'll get to this vocation, I'll get to this future stuff for the young people when I'm done with all this. Or I'll get to it when I have more time. Of course, we all wish we had more time. Or I'll get to it when I've got this part all figured out. There's this, sometimes there is this parallelization with being preoccupied with the present moment. And yet the synod and I think this question of vocation, I think a lot of it is just reorienting ourselves to think more about the future of our young people rather than about just where they are right now. Because that's the moment is now. So what can we do? So here's a few, what I have coming up here is just a few key things of ways to do ministry, some best practices that we've seen across the country, and I think using some of the preparatory document, using some of the Holy Father and the Archbishop's quotes, just how we do it. The first is very simple. Of course, it's a no-brainer. But relational ministry, but relational ministry wherever they are. One of the things that we seem to be hearing a lot is accompanying young people requires going beyond a preconceived framework. So encountering young people where they are, adapting to their time and pace of life, and taking them seriously. So relational ministry has always been a part of the ministry work that we do. But I think one of the elements that's being added here is relational ministry going out. And again, Pope Francis, or actually Archbishop Pierre, reminded us of this, saying the idea of accompaniment, which implies going out to them and being with them. To this we add listening to them. Listening is an important element of discernment. So the first step in this process, and again, looking at that chart of the only 17% are coming on a regular basis to church, we have to go out in order to accompany most of the young people. So the first practice is just relational ministry wherever they are. And sometimes that means, of course, going beyond the walls of the church. Non-judgmental moments of return. This is a key element. The church does not exist to condemn people, but to bring people about an encounter with the visceral love of God's mercy. So one of the things we're finding is that every now and then people do make moments of return. They're not returning from marriages and they're not returning for having their children baptized, as we saw by some of those numbers. But occasionally they do return. Here is one key example that I think is important to look at. This is the same group that was studied that said 17% of millennials go on a weekly basis to church. That same group, that same cohort was asked the same questions regarding Lent. Do you give up anything? 46% give up something. Do you do anything positive? 40%. Do you abstain from meat? 61% of millennials abstain from meat on Fridays and Lent. And do you receive ashes on Ash Wednesday? 50%. Now, we would love those numbers to be even higher, but considering that the baseline is 17%, but on Ash Wednesday, for instance, they're coming on 50%. This is a moment of return. This is one moment of the year. This is a season of the year. We just passed it, but that really seems to gravitate millennials back. In fact, you even notice, if you notice the trend lines, you may even notice some of these numbers go up, like the giving up anything in Lent. Actually, millennials give up things in Lent more frequently than older generations. That's an anomaly. In terms of who goes on Ash Wednesday, more millennials will go on Ash Wednesday than those in the Vatican II generation or the post-Vatican II, the Gen Xers. So this is, as someone said, this is an occasion for hope. This is an occasion of excitement. In a way, I always tell people, while everyone else is supposed to look glum on Ash Wednesday, I think with numbers like this, we should be singing hallelujah. But these are moments of return, and these are opportunities for us to engage with millennials a little more often when they come by. So I think that's a key component to this thing, a best practice. Encourage and integrate young people into the church at every level. Archbishop Pierre said young people need to be accompanying, discerning their path in life, but this accompanying presupposes welcoming them to better integrate them into the life of the church. We know the adage that when I think it was said before, when young people see young people involved in the practice of the faith, it encourages them to be more involved. Numbers generate numbers. So encouraging young people to be integrated at their parishes. And then maybe, one of the things is, for some of you who are in schools, it may be difficult to say, well, how can we engage them in the parishes when we're not there? Sometimes it may mean walking with them, accompanying them to the parish in a sense, and helping them integrate, introducing them to people at a parish at every level, or involving them in an international event, at every level too. The international, the universal level is a great way to engage people. You saw the numbers for World Youth Day, for the National Youth Conferences, for those large events. Those experiences of church are places where young people can be integrated. There are many people who go to World Youth Day who are not active in the practice of their faith, but they go because maybe some friends, somebody they trust, they say, I'll give it a shot. Hey, it's a trip to Europe, it's a trip to Panama, it's a trip to wherever. And they go, and that transforms their life. So that is a great power. So integrating them into those large experiences of church on a national, international, or local level will be key. We find that more people who are involved in the parish ministries, in church ministries, campus ministries, the more they're involved, the more likely they are to choose a path of vocation that's more closely aligned to the practice of the faith. So we can do whatever we can to help encourage and integrate them. Leadership development and training in compassionate evangelization. This is reflecting on Archbishop Pierre's quote. Our evangelization efforts require a profound reconsideration to see if they are effectively communicating the authentic Christian experience, and then he outlines it with closeness, simplicity, warmth, and transparency. So are we training people to be evangelists, but compassionate evangelists, not proselytizers, not people who will guilt them into the faith, but people who are in the practice of closeness, of simplicity, of warmth. Young people today know that the church is judging them. They feel that. So when we're engaging people who are less active in the faith or tangentially kind of the faith, engaging them with closeness and simplicity, with warmth and forgiveness, with gradualness is a key element to evangelization. Can we train more people in a compassionate evangelization in our work? Not just go and tell people about it, but how can they be connected in a way? And sometimes it requires us accompanying them a little further along. We can't just hand off to, and I see a comment in here, the parish can sometimes be, you're right, they can be a place of challenge because they aren't necessarily as welcoming. So it might require us to do a little more work to make sure that we accompany them to the right place. We journey with them if they allow us. So that's just a key element. One thing, if you are working with youth, and I know some of you are, it's connecting youth with adults. You saw on the thing the different influences of key adults, and some of the different studies with young people say that one of the key elements to evangelization and towards future engagement with the faith is that they had a key adult, a non-parent adult that they trusted, a trusted adult in their community that journeyed with them. And that adult can be a young adult, it can be an older adult, it's of all ages. So some key things here, making sure that there are young adult mentors for youth and making sure that there are adult mentors of young adults. So that mentorship is a key thing, a mentorship in the faith. A very practical way is connecting youth with college or career connections. Are there alumni of either your school or alumni of your ministry program that can be re-engaged and can help train up the next group of people? The engagement with older adults, again, we talked about the influence of grandparents. So, making sure that young people are connected with their families and that there's a positive relationship there. We're connecting youth with adults within parishes, dioceses, or at national or global activities. So connecting youth with adults is key. There's this misconception that only youth will engage youth, but more and more we're finding that trusted, authentic adults of any age can engage. I know when I was working at the diocesan level, my most successful person who connected with youth and young adults was 75 years old. He put the 30-year-old, hipster youth minister to shame. That person had a hard time connecting with young people because he was inauthentically trying to be cool. The 75-year-old was being himself, and he had swarms of youth and young adults that would follow him. He was the deacon at a local community parish, and he was the most successful young adult minister I had at the diocese. So age is not a factor. Authentic and trusted and those willing to spend time is. So connecting youth with adults is a key element there. Introducing them to those people, I think that's part of the thing. One of the things that we in ministry can do, we don't have to always be the one that's their connection, but we can introduce them to adults who could be their connection. Pope Francis, in his address last month, said, listen to older people, talk to them, ask them questions, make them dream, and from those dreams, take what you need to move forward so that you can have a vision and make that vision concrete. This is your mission today. This is the mission the church gives you today. So again, Pope Francis really focused in on the Joel passage about our old men will dream dreams and our young men will see visions. And really taking that passage and asking young people to take the dreams of previous generations and make them your vision. So it's a very interesting relationship of how the generations can speak to each other about their dreams. And then speaking, Archbishop Pierre again said, thinking of the massive spiritual events like World Youth Day, the majority of young people show a joy of living. Their concerns center on peace, gentleness, cooperation, openness. Their attitudes invite us to have faith and confidence not only in them, but also in their peers. It will be they that carry out a true silent spiritual revolution. So the young people, again, engaged in relationships at the global scale will certainly be part of that. You spoke before about parents. Parent ministry, as I said, is so key. In Amoris Laetitia, Pope Francis said the church wishes with humility and compassion to reach out to families and to help each family to discover the best way to overcome any obstacles it encounters. So some practical suggestions. Hosting parent nights, especially for those with young people who are about to transition. So if there are high school seniors, college freshmen, hosting parent nights and engaging with the parents is a key element to ministry. We can't forget them because in a sense, not only are they encouraging of vocations, but the parents themselves are going through a crisis moment as their young people transition in and out of youth and young adulthood. And they need our support as well. So support and accompany parents, in particular those whose sons and daughters have disengaged from the church. They need our support. They need to be reminded it's not your fault if, for instance, your son or daughter no longer goes to church. It's not because you took them too little, too much. It happens, but the best thing we can do is to accompany them. And we could do a whole other webinar basically on how we can help parents work with their sons or daughters who are either active in the faith or not active in the faith, and that parent ministry is a key component to this. And so encouraging parent-to-parent peer ministry and outreach. If there are parents who are on board, then the key thing would be to see if they can help you engage other parents in this journey. But doing a parent ministry is, I think, a key because it certainly reiterates things. It's not to enforce them or convert them to any sort of new thing. Simply being there to support those parents will go a long way for them knowing that they were encouraged and therefore they can hopefully pass that on to their sons or daughters no matter how close or far they are from the practice of the faith. Regularly speak with young people about vocations and their future. We sometimes forget to just simply speak about it. I think we assume a lot of stuff. So talk to young people about life choices and spiritual futures. I think that there's a component to, you don't have to sit there and pull them aside and say, I see in 5 years you're going to be a priest. I think just talking to them about where they're going in life and having you as a trusted person that they talk to about their life choices. And where do you see yourself spiritually in 5 years? What are the things, where do you think you're going to be? If you go off to college, if you go beyond college, how will you stay connected with your faith? Asking them those questions at a younger age, having them start to think about them as they get younger. I would encourage you also to engage in the synod process. As the church talks about vocations, we certainly want your voices as well. So certainly in whatever way is possible, please engage in the synod process and let your voice be heard so that we can better, as a church, talk about vocations in whatever way you think is best. Make personal vocation invitations to all young people. I mean, that goes without saying. But again, it's the one-by-one thing. And vocation invitations, I don't just simply mean, and sometimes I know that many of you are on the call when you think about vocations or vocations to the religious life, to priesthood, but making a personal invitation for them to consider marriage if you feel that that is their calling. Even if it's not, continue just making that invitation for them to go a little deeper will be key. And then I would encourage you to collaborate with marriage, vocations, lay ministry efforts within your local diocese. Find out what's going on and certainly consider collaborating with them in their work. And my last one here is minding the gap, transition ministry. As the Synod Preparatory document said, in the task of accompanying younger generation, the church accepts her call to collaborate in the joy of young people rather than be tempted to take control of the faith. Young people today are going through many transitions, very quick transitions. The world is presenting them with a lot of choices. So in this process of transition, as young people transition from youth to young adulthood, from high school to college, from college into the working world, from single life to married life, from one relationship to another, some people are moving around geographically in much greater numbers than, or much greater frequency than before. So some tips here are affirming their commitments and engaging their spirituality. Affirm what is it that they are committed to. If you affirm the things that they have already committed to in life, so for instance, if they are in a relationship with a boyfriend or girlfriend, affirming that, affirming their commitment. If they've committed to a particular course of study, affirm that. Affirming commitments reminds them that it's a positive to make a commitment because that's sometimes the thing that they struggle with as they go forward. So affirming even the smallest commitment, like, hey, you committed yourself to that task, good for you. Keeping in touch with them. It's a little extra work on our part, but if you are involved with youth in a high school setting, staying in touch with them as they continue on in their journey. It was talked about before that sometimes the parish or the diocese may be a challenging place to pass them off to. So if that is something that if they go to an area where there is no ministry for young adults or college students or the next level of their spiritual transition, you keep in touch with them. At the very least, your presence will be the face of the church for them. You know, as I said, it may require extra work because it does require more time with them, but do keep in touch. We live in a social media age, so it is a little bit easier at times, but I would encourage you to stay in touch. Make connections for them to other ministries in the church. So in your own work, if you can find other ministries in the church that you trust, that you can hand them off to. So if you know of young people moving to an area and you happen to, you know, know the diocesan leader or a parish leader of youth or young adults in that area, maybe set up a connection. Maybe, you know, connect your young people to that person. Hand them off in a gentle way. Do keep in touch with them, but find people. So sometimes it means going, you know, Brother Chris, you know, connected with me at this conference. There may have been other people that he may have connected with. So if he knows of a young person who's going to Washington, D.C., he could potentially call me up and say, hey, could you connect up with this young person who's coming to Washington? They're going to be in your area. Maybe you can point them out to places that they should go. So think about all the connections you have and work those relationships so that you can make the good connections. And then, of course, accompany them through their fragile transition moments. Even within their youth, even within their young adulthood, young people, the transitions are often the places where we find them disengaging with church, with spirituality. Some of them disengage from society. We find that depression and loneliness is on the rise. And sometimes it's simply because during those fragile transition moments, nobody was there for them. So they disconnect from a lot of things. Church is one of the many things they disconnect from when nobody is there to accompany them. So certainly if they're going through tough times, and I don't mean like just the deaths in the family. Those are certainly things to accompany them through. But even those seemingly innocent transition moments, if they broke up with their girlfriend of a year, you know, we may sit there and say, yeah, get over it, you know, move on. But for a young person, if you break up with your girlfriend or boyfriend that you've had for a year, that's a major life moment. That's a major crisis of faith. Accompanying them through those moments is key. And then they realize that the people that accompany them are people of faith, and it's their faith that certainly informs it. So I know that we've gone a little longer than I thought, but I wanted to just, before moving on, just really asking the question, what else have you seen working that might work within the Lasallian tradition and charism? What best practices have you seen? I just want to allow this time to just raise up the wisdom of the group that's gathered here. So if you have any particular questions, or if you have particular ideas, or you have some other things that are very specific to the Lasallian tradition, there'll certainly be a time to raise that up. I would love to hear from that as well. And then when we're done with that, I'll wrap it up with a moment of prayer, and then we can be on our day.
I think, Paul, I'm very much affirmed by the last couple of slides in terms of, I think, this question here. I mean, I think key to us is the relationship we have with our students, and I think that we foster that in all of our educators, and kind of say this is at the core of what De La Salle and those first brothers, first teachers were all about. And so I think that much of what's said there, I feel, you know, we have in our blood, and it's now kind of how do we take it to the next level? How do we continue to encourage those kind of things to happen, mindful of the bigger picture I think some of the conversation was taking place in the chat box. I think sometimes I feel that sometimes we kind of get caught up in our own little Lasallian world or our little silo, and I think that, yeah, we may have them for 4 years, since most of us are in high schools and most of our ministries are high schools, but really the challenge, I think, is how do we find creative ways to accompany them beyond, that period. And I think you mentioned a couple of ways, and I think that is happening, but I think it's how do we capitalize on much of what is key to who we are.
Yeah, and I would say that from the diocesan perspective, from the parish perspective, many of them, and I want to speak for all of them, but I know a number of them would welcome if they got an email or a phone call from somebody who was working in ministry on a local level and said, hey, let's collaborate, or I just want to find out what you're doing so I know where I'm sending people. They would simply love it, because I think they would love to be hearing from people who, so if you would like to make those connections, certainly you can be in touch with me. I'm happy to connect you with some people in your local area who would be good to talk to if we can find them, and we certainly want to connect you up with those offices so that, because I think that more collaboration in the church, getting beyond our specific things, and believe me, diocesan and parish people are in their silos too, so we all suffer from the same illness, and I think that just breaking out of those shells, I think, goes a long way, and I think that because I think one of the things we're discovering is that young people today, especially young adults, they're very global in their mindset. They think globally. They do not think locally. So for them, they're going to graduate from high school or college, and the whole world is open to them. So they're not thinking, well, I'll just stay in this town for the rest of my life. Some do. I'm not saying everybody is that way, but there's a greater percentage of people with a global mindset. So if they think globally, we as a church, who's in a way the Catholic charism is universality, and so being global is in our blood too. And so, part of the Lasallian tradition is relationships, and part of our Catholic tradition is being universal. And so breaking down those silos is a key element to that. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to build on what Brother Chris had to offer. Paul, thanks for your work with us this evening. You had mentioned it earlier, the importance of developing a future-focused ministry, and I thought, when I first heard that, I thought, wow, we're back to simply focusing on what these young people have to offer off in some distant future. But I really appreciate your comments later on that really focus on our present being with young people. I think accompaniment means we're willing to walk with young people in the everyday, and to the extent that we're credible partners with them in the everyday, then we're credible people to turn to when a crisis hits or when a transition time comes. So how to, and in education, certainly we're talking about trying to mirror back to young people their gifts, their talents, helping them get in a habit of saying, what do I have to offer to the world, and how can I put my own gifts and talents at the service of the world in the everyday? Yeah. And when the time comes to transition, then okay, now we've got a bigger decision about continuing education or a career or a lifestyle. But if we're not getting them into the everyday pattern of saying what I do today matters, and the way I love today is going to help empower how I love when these bigger decision times come up.
Yeah, and thank you for and certainly not the perception of being future focused. And much of the work that I do is with many of the parish and diocesan people who many times are, and I don't know how it is in the educational system as much, but I know in those settings there's very much a focus. They get so focused on the now that they don't think about the like, where am I how am I leading them and where am I taking them next? And so it's more the future focus in terms of what we as ministers are doing. What they as young people are certainly need to be focused on the here and now, but with an eye to the future, of course. but we as ministers sometimes get so preoccupied with what is right in front of us that we don't stop to think, where am I, where am I taking a young person? Because that is a struggle I find with some ministers is, you ask them, so what are you leading them to? And they're like, well, leading them to the retreat next week. Well, okay, but beyond that and beyond that, where are you all, what is ultimately your hopes for that young person? And sometimes they struggle to find that. So it's more or less a reaction to us as ministers just not being too preoccupied with just the tasks, but to be thinking in a more visionary way for our young people. But I think incorporating the integration into the everyday. My background is in the Jesuit tradition, so I certainly affirm that as well.
Thank you.
Well, I'll kind of close us off with, again, getting us back to maybe the core again. And again, this is speaking kind of to the point that was just made about the young people that are right in front of us, the young people in our midst. And so just kind of some quotes here. Again, thinking of those particular young people that you're ministering to at this time, think about them when you hear these words. Living in this hope in Jesus Christ, young people discover their dreams, but we must remind them that God too has a plan and dreams for them. From this very moment, we are encouraged, as Pope Francis constantly reminds us, to be a truly outgoing missionary church, shining brightly like a star, leading young people on their journey to encounter the true light. Pope Francis himself says, and again, keeping in mind those young people that we work with every day and what they think of their future, a better world can be built as a result of their efforts, their desire to change, and their generosity. Do not be afraid to listen to the Spirit who proposes bold choices. Do not delay when your conscience asks you to take risks in following the Master. And then, just kind of talking about where my journey with these young people. These are some examples. Deborah is on the left, and she was welcomed into the Sisters of the St. Francis Sisters of the Joliet area. She was, this was her ceremony. And then my young adult Brendan, who I worked with for many years, this is his ordination to the priesthood in Chicago with Cardinal George. My young person Allison, this is her wedding picture, and that was the vocation to which we were journeying with her towards, to which she also felt. And then Nick, who Nick went off to graduate school, went and got his master's degree at the University of Dallas, and is now a university minister for the University of Dallas, and that's him. So again, his vocation continues to unfold, and at the moment, his life choices have taken him to be a lay ecclesial minister working with college students in Texas. So these, for me, are for me the realization of that dream for these young people. I've had a future-focused ministry for them, and I've constantly been accompanying them, journeying with them. Many of them I've walked with them through their transition moments. So it gives me great joy to see them ultimately find where it is that the Lord is ultimately leading them, their vocation of love. So to close, this is the prayer that the Holy Father has given us for the upcoming synod. So in your own way, just pray along. Lord Jesus, in journeying towards the synod, your church turns her attention to all the young people of the world. We pray that they might boldly take charge of their lives, aim for the most beautiful and profound things of life, and always keep their hearts unencumbered. Accompanied by wise and generous guides, help them to respond to the call you make to each of them, to realize a proper plan of life and achieve happiness. Keep their hearts open to dreaming great dreams and make them concerned for the good of others. Like the beloved disciple, may they stand at the foot of the cross to receive your mother as a gift from you. May they be witnesses to your resurrection and be aware that you are at their side as they joyously proclaim you as Lord. Amen. And so it's with great pleasure that I was able to be with you today. I thank you for your questions. I'm happy to certainly be a part of any conversations you may have going forward. And I ask your prayers for the work that we're doing nationally with the Synod, with World Youth Day. If you have very specific questions on those, I'm always happy to respond to them. And again, I thank you. Thank you, Brother Chris, for inviting me, and thank you all of you for your time this evening. For some of us on the East Coast, it's getting late, so I appreciate your the time you've dedicated to spend talking about this, and most importantly, for thinking about the young people in your midst right now, and that you will continue to journey with for a while to come. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul, very much. And again, yes, please do be assured of our prayers, and we hope that our paths will cross, well into the future. And thank you all for the time this evening. We will again our final presentation is next week, May 9th, with Kanena and Stan kind of offering a somewhat of a response and kind of their own reflection to the last two presentations and their own kind of input. So thank you all. Have a good evening. Paul, thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.